Vincent Moreau ruled Chicago like a man who had never once been told no. His name alone could empty a room or fill a courtroom with silence. He had built his empire on fear, loyalty, and the unshakable belief that everything in his life was exactly where he put it, including his wife. So when his associates laughed with him that night, when he leaned back in his chair and said those words with absolute certainty, not one person in that room dared to tell him the truth. Because 3 floors above their heads, Evelyn Harper Moreau was folding her last blouse into a suitcase, and she had not cried once. If this story hits you somewhere real, hit that like button, drop your city in the comments, and follow along. I want to see how far this story travels. Now let's begin. The Monarch Club sat on the 42nd floor of the Vandermeer Tower, and on a Thursday night in late October, it smelled like aged bourbon, cigar smoke, and the particular kind of confidence that only men with too much money and too little accountability ever managed to generate. The lighting was dim and deliberate, the kind that made every face look powerful and every deal look clean. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed the Chicago skyline like a painting, the city burning orange and gold beneath a low cloud cover, Lake Michigan pressing dark and endless against the eastern edge of everything. Vincent Moreau sat at the head of the private table like he always did, not because anyone had assigned him the seat, but because no one had ever thought to take it first. He was 41 years old, broad through the shoulders, with a jaw that looked like it had been carved out of something harder than bone. His suit was charcoal gray and worth more than most people's monthly rent. His watch caught the light every time he lifted his glass, which he did often. He was the kind of man who looked entirely at ease in rooms like this, and that ease was not performance. It was the real thing, worn smooth by decades of practice. Across from him sat Marco Ricci, 63 years old, silver-haired, and running the South Side operation with the same quiet brutality he had brought to it for 30 years. Beside Marco was his son Danny, who was 28 and still learning that silence was a currency more valuable than most. On Vincent's right sat Callum Drexler, who controlled distribution networks through the northern suburbs and who had the kind of steady, humorless eyes that made new people in the room instinctively lower their voices. There were 2 other men at the table whose names don't matter for this story because they were the kind of men who were always present at these things and never said anything worth remembering. The evening had gone well. Numbers had been reviewed, territory questions had been settled with minimal friction. A dispute between 2 lower-level operations in Pilsen had been resolved in a way that left both parties moderately dissatisfied, which was Vincent's preferred outcome. Dissatisfaction kept people from getting comfortable, and comfortable men made mistakes. He had poured the last of a very good bottle of scotch into 5 glasses, and the conversation had loosened into the kind of easy, sidelong talk that happened after the real business was finished. It was Marco who brought it up. He did it the way older men sometimes do. Not cruelly, but with the blunt familiarity of someone who had known Vincent long enough to say things that other people wouldn't. "My nephew keeps asking about Evelyn," Marco said, turning his glass slowly on the tablecloth. "Says he sees her at the gallery openings, the fundraiser circuit. Says she goes alone." Vincent didn't tense. He was too practiced for that. He took a slow sip of his scotch and set the glass down with exactly the same amount of care he always used. "She prefers it that way. She's not much for these kinds of rooms." "Smart woman," Callum said. "The smartest I've ever known," Vincent agreed, and he meant it, even if the way he said it suggested a kind of distant appreciation, the way a man might describe a painting he owned but rarely looked at. Marco pressed slightly. "My wife says she heard Evelyn was looking at positions overseas, consulting work. London, maybe." Vincent laughed. It was a short, genuine sound, not performed. He leaned back in his chair and shook his head with the relaxed certainty of a man who has never once considered the possibility of being wrong about something in his own house. "Evelyn's not going to London. She's been restless, that's all. She gets like this sometimes, talks about work, talks about her old career. She'll get past it." He picked up his glass again. "My wife would never leave me." The words sat on this table for a moment. Danny Ricci looked down at his drink. Callum Drexler didn't change his expression, but something shifted in the region of his eyes. Something careful and private that he did not let surface. Marco said nothing, just nodded once, slowly, the way old men nod when they decide not to argue with something they know is wrong. Nobody corrected him. The elevator that ran from the Monarch Club's private floor down to the Vandermeer Tower's residential levels, was paneled in dark walnut and moved without a sound. Vincent wrote it down alone at 11:47 at night, loosening his tie with one hand and scrolling through his phone with the other. There were 3 messages from his lieutenant, Ray Castellano, about a situation developing on the west side that would require attention tomorrow morning. There was 1 message from his attorney. There was nothing from Evelyn. That was not unusual. Evelyn had stopped texting him things that didn't require a response a long time ago, and he had gradually stopped noticing the silence where those messages used to be. The penthouse occupied the entire top floor of the tower. It was the kind of space that architects photographed for magazines and then never quite managed to make feel like anyone actually lived there. High ceilings, polished concrete floors softened by enormous rugs, furniture chosen more for visual weight than comfort. Evelyn had tried in the early years to make it feel like a home. She had brought in plants, bought books, and arranged them on shelves that had been built for decoration, hung 3 paintings she genuinely loved in the hallway. Over time, the plants had been replaced by ones that required less attention. The paintings were still there, but Vincent had never once asked her what they were. He came through the front door at 11:52 and stood in the entry for a moment, registering the quiet. The lights in the main living area were on but low. He assumed Evelyn was asleep. He was already thinking about tomorrow, already composing the conversation he'd have with Ray in the morning, already moving on to the next thing the way he always did. He set his phone on the entry table, and that's when he heard it. The soft, specific sound of a closet being closed carefully, deliberately, by someone who was trying not to make noise. He stood still. It was the kind of stillness that came not from calm, but from the sudden, animal attention of a man who had survived a long time in a very dangerous world by learning to pay attention to wrong sounds in familiar places. He walked down the hallway. The door to the master bedroom was open. The lights were on. Not the overhead lights, but the 2 lamps on either side of the room, which gave everything a warm, even glow that made what he was seeing look almost domestic, almost reasonable, until it didn't. 2 suitcases stood at the foot of the bed. They were large, the expensive ones Evelyn had brought into the marriage from her own life before him, the ones that had her initials stamped into the leather handles, EHM, though she'd stopped using the M on most things in the last year. They were zipped and latched and standing upright with the quiet, finished posture of luggage that is ready to go. Evelyn stood beside the dresser with her back to him, folding a cream-colored sweater with the focused, deliberate movements of someone who was operating entirely on interior resolve. She was dressed in dark jeans and a gray blouse, and her dark blonde hair was pulled back from her face. She didn't startle when he appeared in the doorway. She had known he was coming down the hall. She had heard his footsteps. She finished folding the sweater. She set it on top of the smaller of the 2 bags. Then she turned and looked at him. Evelyn Harper was 38 years old. She had the kind of face that people described as striking rather than beautiful. Strong cheekbones, a direct gaze, a mouth that in another life might have smiled more easily. She had 2 graduate degrees, a professional reputation that had once been formidable in consulting circles, and 3 years of this marriage written in the precise, controlled stillness of how she stood right now. She didn't look angry. That was the thing that hit him first and wrong. She didn't look angry. She looked done. "You're home early?" she said. Vincent didn't move from the doorway. His eyes went from her face to the bags to her face again, and the part of his brain that was very good at reading situations was doing something it had almost no practice doing. It was trying to categorize a threat it had never anticipated. "What is this?" he said. It wasn't quite a question. "I think you can see what it is." "Evelyn." He said her name the way he said most things that needed to be handled, with authority, with the expectation that authority would be sufficient. "Put whatever you're doing on pause and tell me what's happening." She almost smiled, not warmly. It was the expression of someone who has imagined a moment for a long time and is now watching it arrive exactly as predicted. "I'm leaving, Vincent. I have a 7 a.m. flight to London. I have a position at Hartwell Consulting that starts in 2 weeks. I have an apartment in Notting Hill that I've already paid the first 2 months on." She said it without drama, without the trembling delivery of someone making a scene. She said it the way you read items off a list. "I've been planning this for 4 months." The silence in the room was different from the silence in the rest of the penthouse. This one had weight. Vincent stepped inside. He moved to the center of the room and stood there. And for a moment he looked less like the man who had sat at the head of that table 40 minutes ago, and more like a person in a space that had just rearranged itself around him without warning. He looked at the bags again. He looked at the dresser and saw for the first time that her jewelry box was gone. The photograph that had sat on her side of the nightstand, of the two of them at a friend's wedding in Napa, years ago the last photograph she'd kept in the room, was gone too. "You're serious," he said. "I've never been more serious about anything in my life." "Because of what? Because of London? Because of some job?" Something moved across her face, not anger, not yet, but the precursor to it, the controlled compression of someone who has heard exactly the wrong thing in exactly the way they expected to hear it. "You just called my career some job." "That's not what I—" "It is exactly what you meant." She crossed her arms, not defensively, but with the patient posture of someone who has had this conversation in her head many times and is now simply reading her own lines. "A position at Hartwell Consulting is something I have been working toward for 6 years. Before I married you, before I stopped working to stand next to you at your functions and your dinners and your negotiations, where everyone looked at me and saw nothing except your wife." She paused. "I want to be clear that I am not doing this because I'm angry. I'm doing this because I'm done being angry. Anger meant I still thought it could change. I stopped being angry about 8 months ago." Vincent ran a hand over his face. It was a gesture Evelyn had seen before. Not distress, not real distress, but the performance of a man recalibrating, buying a few seconds to find the right angle. She knew his gestures the way you know the sound of a house settling at night, not because you pay attention, but because you can't help it. "Evelyn, listen. Don't do that." "Don't do what?" "Don't use the voice." She looked at him steadily. "The one you use when you're managing a situation. I'm not a situation. I'm your wife. And I am telling you that I'm leaving, and I need you to actually hear that and not immediately think about how to fix it, so I stay." He stopped. He looked at her. And for the first time that night, something genuine moved across his face. Not strategy, not authority, but the raw, disoriented expression of a man who is looking at something he thought was permanent and finding that it isn't. "I love you," he said. She waited. "Did you hear me?" "I love you." "I know you think you do," she said quietly. "When's my birthday, Vincent?" He opened his mouth, and then he closed it. The question had arrived like a switch thrown in a dark room, and the darkness it revealed was specific and terrible. "March," he said. "March. March 9th, she said. "We've been together for 5 years. I've never missed your birthday. Not once. You forgot mine the second year, and the third year you had Ray send flowers with a card you didn't write, and this year you were in Miami and you sent a text at 11:15 at night because someone on your staff reminded you." He said nothing. "What's my favorite book?" The silence stretched. "What do I drink every morning? Not coffee. What do I actually drink every morning, every single day, that I have been drinking since before we met?" His jaw was tight. He knew somewhere in the back of his mind that there was an answer to this question, that he had seen it 1,000 times at the breakfast table, the specific color of the mug, the smell of it, but the name of it would not come, and its failure to come landed in the room like something dropped from a great height. "Evelyn, Earl Grey," she said, "with a little milk and no sugar, every morning for 12 years. You have sat across from me at that kitchen table more than 1,000 times." She didn't say it cruelly. She said it the way someone reads a verdict, clearly, completely, without needing to emphasize any single word because the weight is already there. "You don't know my birthday without being reminded. You don't know my favorite book. You don't know what I drink in the morning. You told your friends tonight, don't look surprised, Marco Ricci's nephew is not discreet. You told them that I would never leave you." She picked up the smaller bag and set it beside the larger one. "And you believed it. That's the part that finally convinced me to go. Not the forgetting, not the family dinners where your mother treated me like furniture. Not the years of watching you delegate everything that mattered. It was the fact that you were so certain, that you looked at your life and saw everything in its place. And I was just—" She paused. "In my place." Vincent stood in the center of the room and did not speak. It was, Evelyn would think about later, the longest she had ever seen him go without speaking in 3 years of marriage. Where did this come from? He said finally. You never... I talked to you, she said. I talked to you for 2 years. The first year I thought we were still adjusting. The second year I started telling you plainly, specifically, what I needed, what was missing, what hurt. You listened well enough to say the right things in the moment, and then nothing changed. By the third year, I had stopped telling you because I had accepted that telling you wasn't going to be the way things changed. She looked at the window. Chicago sprawled below them, enormous and indifferent. So I made a different plan. London, he said. London. He moved toward the bags, not aggressively. Evelyn didn't step back, but she watched his hands. Evelyn, you can't just... I can. Her voice was steady. I've spoken with an attorney. I have my own accounts. I have my own career waiting for me. I have a life I planned for myself, and I am walking into it. You can't stop me from leaving, Vincent, not legally and not any other way. He stopped. He was close enough that she could see the specific quality of his jaw right now. Tight, controlled, but underneath it something she hadn't seen on his face in years, something young and badly frightened. Give me a chance, he said. I've been giving you chances for 3 years. Then give me one more. So you can feel better about this? So you can say you tried? She shook her head. I'm not doing this for your comfort. For us. He said it roughly, without the smoothness of his usual delivery, and it came out more honest for that reason. Give me one more chance for us. Evelyn looked at him for a long moment. She had imagined this part of the conversation too, had run it 100 different ways in her head over the past months. She had imagined herself walking past him and out the door, and she had imagined herself crying, and she had imagined herself saying things that she would later regret. What she had not imagined was standing here and feeling what she actually felt, which was not hatred, not even bitterness in this moment, but something much harder to live with, something that felt like grief. She still loved him. That was the cruelest part of this whole architecture. After everything, she still loved the man she had believed he could be. She just no longer believed he was going to become him. I'm going to sleep in the guest room, she said. My flight is at 7. You can have the rest of tonight to think about whatever you need to think about. She picked up both bags, one in each hand. Don't come in. She walked out of the bedroom. Vincent stood where she'd left him, in the center of the room, with the lamps burning their warm, even light over a space that suddenly felt like a stage set. Everything in its place, everything perfect, and none of it real. He didn't follow her. He stood there for a long time. Then he sat down on the edge of the bed, and he put his elbows on his knees, and he looked at the floor. His phone buzzed once in his jacket pocket. Ray, probably, with something that needed handling, some fire in some corner of the empire that required his name and his voice and his authority. He didn't reach for it. Wug. He didn't sleep that night. At 2 a.m, he was in the kitchen with a glass of water he hadn't drunk, sitting at the island where he had sat across from Evelyn 1,000 mornings and never once learned the name of what she was drinking. The apartment was deeply quiet. The city outside the windows was doing what cities did at 2 a.m, its nighttime version of itself, all amber light and distant movement. He tried, sitting there, to build a case. It was what he did with everything. Collected facts, assessed damages, determined response. He told himself that she was overwhelmed. He told himself that the London thing was a reaction, a bid for attention that had escalated further than she intended, and that now had its own momentum. He told himself that people in difficult periods of marriage did things like this, and that it didn't mean what it appeared to mean. He tried. The case didn't hold, because the things she had done in that bedroom, the quiet, methodical way she had answered his every objection before he could make it, the way she had looked at him with something past anger, the specific inventory of what he didn't know about her. None of that was the behavior of a woman making a dramatic gesture. That was the behavior of a woman who had already grieved the marriage and was now simply closing the door behind her. He got up. He walked to the hallway. He stood outside the guest room door for a long time without knocking. He could hear nothing from inside. She was either asleep or lying awake the way he was, but either way the door was closed and she had asked him not to come in, and he, who had not obeyed a rule he hadn't set himself in 15 years, did not open it. He went back to the kitchen. He opened a drawer, not looking for anything specific, and found himself looking at a collection of things that lived in that drawer the way things accumulate in shared spaces. Takeout menus, a spare key to a car he no longer owned, a birthday card from his mother that he'd never thrown away, a roll of tape. Under all of it, against the back of the drawer, his fingers found something that did not belong with the rest. 3 envelopes. They were sealed. His name was written on each one in Evelyn's handwriting, Vincent, and they were numbered in the upper left corner. 1, 2, 3. The paper was not new. It had the slight softness of things that have been handled and then carefully put away. He looked at them for a long time. He sat down on the kitchen floor with his back against the cabinet, the posture of a man who is not currently able to hold himself upright at a table, like a person who has things under control. And he opened the first envelope. The letter inside was dated 14 months ago. Vincent, it began, I'm not going to send this because I've decided that I'm going to try one more time to say what I need to say to your face. But I've been writing to you in my head for months, and it's gotten to the point where I think I need to put it down on paper just to know if it's real, what I feel, whether I'm being unreasonable, whether the thing that's been slowly draining out of me has a name. It does. The name is invisible. That's what I've been for a year, not mistreated. I want to be specific about this. You don't raise your voice. You don't threaten me. You're generous with money in ways that feel like they should matter and somehow don't. What you do is look through me. You look through me in rooms full of your people, and at your family's dinners, and in our own kitchen in the morning. You look at me and your eyes don't stop. They're already somewhere else. I had a meeting today with a former colleague who is building something remarkable, and she offered me a consulting role. I told her I'd think about it. Driving home, I realized I'd been saying I'd think about it to opportunities like this for 2 years. I'm 37 years old, and I am extraordinarily good at my job, and I have been steadily setting it aside to be present in your life, and you have never once asked me how that feels. I'm not sending this yet. I'm going to try to tell you, but I needed to write it down so I know it's true. He read it twice. Then he opened the second one. It was dated 9 months ago. I tried to tell you, last Tuesday, when you came home and I was still awake. I started to say it, and you got a phone call and you took it. And when you came back 20 minutes later, you sat down and said, "You were saying something?" And I looked at your face, the very slight impatience on it, how much you needed to be somewhere else. And I said, "Nothing. It can wait. It's been waiting for a year and a half." Your mother called me yesterday to tell me that I'd seated the wrong people next to each other at the Ricci dinner and that I'd embarrassed the family. She said it the way she says everything, with a kind of deliberate, gentle cruelty that she has perfected over a lifetime. And I sat with the phone in my hand afterward, and I realized that I was not angry at her. I was angry at you, because you have never once told her to stop. You've never put yourself between me and her casual dismissal, not once in 3 years. And I've covered for that because I didn't want to make it a problem between us. But it is a problem. It's been a problem since the 2nd month of our marriage, and it is still a problem, and you can't see it because you have never had to feel it. I'm still not sending this. I keep not sending them. The London position is serious now. Hartwell reached out to me directly. I haven't told you. He didn't open the third one immediately. He sat with it in his hands. The kitchen was very quiet. The clock on the microwave said 3:17 a.m. Somewhere below them, the city was still doing its nighttime work. He thought about the conversation at the Monarch Club. He heard himself saying those words again, "My wife would never leave me." And the sound of his own laughter coming back to him across the hours felt like something he wanted to be able to reach into the past and pull back. He opened the third letter. It was dated 3 months ago. I've accepted the position. I start in 2 weeks from the day I finally actually leave, which I haven't decided on yet. I keep moving the date. I don't know what I'm waiting for. No, I know what I'm waiting for. I'm waiting to stop loving you. I've been waiting for that for 2 years and it hasn't happened. And I don't think it's going to happen on a schedule. So I've made a different decision. I'm going to leave while I still love you. Because if I stay until I don't love you anymore, there will be nothing left to take with me. I'd rather carry the love out the door with me than leave it behind with everything else I've already given this marriage. I'm not sending this one either. I'm going to leave these in the kitchen and let you find them after I'm gone. Or maybe you'll clean out the drawer and never find them at all. That's fine too. I hope you're well, Vincent. I genuinely do. Evelyn. He sat on the floor until his back ached. He sat there until the clock read 4:02 and then 4:31 and then 5:15. At some point, he stopped processing the letters and simply held them in his hands, folded, and sat with the specific quality of the silence. The sky outside the windows had begun its early shift from black to the dark, bruised gray of pre-dawn Chicago. He could see the first suggestion of it over the lake. He thought about the fact that in less than 2 hours, Evelyn would come out of the guest room and pick up her bags and call a car and leave. He thought about the fact that he could stop her. He had stopped a great many things in his life. He had resources and leverage and a long, practiced history of making problems resolve themselves in directions that suited him. He thought about the letters. He thought about the word invisible. He thought about the fact that she had known, walking into that bedroom tonight, exactly how the conversation would go. That she had anticipated every word he said. That she had answers prepared not because she was combative, but because she had been having the conversation in her own head for so long that she knew it by heart. He thought about the birthday, March 9th. He thought about Earl Grey tea with a little milk and no sugar and 1,000 mornings at that kitchen table when he had been somewhere else in his mind while she sat across from him and drank it. At 6:15, he heard the guest room door open. He didn't move. She came down the hallway with her bags. He could hear the quiet roll of the wheels on the floor. And she stopped in the kitchen doorway and saw him sitting on the floor with the 3 envelopes in his hands. She looked at him for a moment without speaking. He looked back at her. She had changed into a charcoal blazer and her hair was down. She looked composed and tired and absolutely certain of herself in a way that he recognized from the version of her he had first met. The Evelyn before him, before this, the one who had walked into rooms and owned them before she'd started making herself smaller to fit beside him. "You found them," she said. Yeah. She didn't apologize for them. She didn't soften them. She simply looked at him with the patient, clear expression of someone who has nothing left to hide. "Evelyn," he said, don't." Her voice was gentle, but it was a wall. "Don't tell me what you need right now. That's been the whole problem." He swallowed. He looked at the letters in his hands. He said the only true thing he'd managed to produce all night. Not constructed, not managed, just true. "I didn't know I was doing it." She was quiet for a moment. "I know," she said. "That's the saddest part." Her phone buzzed once in her jacket pocket. The car, probably. She picked up her bags. And that is where he made the first real choice of the night. Not the conversations, not the letters, not the sitting on the kitchen floor. He looked up at her from where he sat and he said, "Give me 24 hours. She paused. Her hand was on the handle of the larger bag. "Not to change your mind," he said quickly. "I'm not asking you to stay. I'm asking you for 24 hours to... I don't know what I'm asking. I need you to let me try to understand what I did before you walk out of it." He stopped. He looked at her. "Please. 24 hours. If you still want to go after that, I'll drive you to the airport myself." Outside, the city had fully shifted into morning gray. The lake was visible through the windows, wide and pewter-colored. Evelyn Harper Moreau stood in her own kitchen with 2 suitcases and a plane ticket and 3 years of a life she was leaving, and she looked at the man sitting on her kitchen floor holding her unsent letters, and she thought about all the versions of this moment she had imagined. She had not imagined this one. 24 hours, she said finally. "I'm not moving my bags. I'm not unpacking. I'm postponing the flight, not canceling it. And if this is just another way for you to manage the situation, I will know, and I will go." "I understand," he said. She looked at him for one more long moment. Then she set her bags back against the wall, and she went to the cabinet and took down a mug, and she put the kettle on. She didn't offer him anything. She stood at the counter and waited for the water to boil and didn't look at him. And Vincent Moreau sat on his kitchen floor and watched his wife make herself tea, Earl Grey, with a little milk and no sugar, and understood, for the first time in a very long time, that he had been given something he had absolutely no guarantee of deserving. He had 24 hours. And somewhere below their windows, unseen and unstoppable, news of what had happened in this penthouse tonight was already beginning to travel. A whisper passed between the wrong ears, a text message sent to a journalist contact, a rumor moving through the network like current through a wire. And by morning, the Mafia boss's marriage would be the kind of story that Chicago ate for breakfast. But Vincent didn't know that yet. He was still sitting on the floor. The kettle went off at 6:23, and Evelyn poured the water without looking at him. She moved through the kitchen the way she always did in the morning. Efficient, quiet, contained. And Vincent watched her from the floor for another 30 seconds before he got up, because sitting on the floor was a thing he'd been willing to do in the dark when it was just him and the letters. But now the light was coming, and he was still a man who could not fully let go of the instinct to stand up and take up space. He got to his feet slowly. His back was stiff. He put the 3 envelopes on the counter, and he didn't know what to do with his hands, so he just stood there. Evelyn dipped the tea bag, watched the color bleed into the water. She added the milk from the small ceramic pitcher she kept on the second shelf. She had always kept it there, separate from the regular milk. In a small container she refilled herself every 2 days. And he looked at that pitcher and thought about how many hundreds of times it had been right there, in plain sight, and he had never once registered it as anything except background. She wrapped her hands around the mug. "You should sleep," she said without turning around. "I'm not going to sleep." "Then sit down at least. You look like you've been hit by something." He pulled out a stool at the island and sat. She stayed at the counter. The distance between them was 8 feet, and every inch of it was specific and intentional. "I want to ask you something," he said. "All right." "The position. Hartwell. When they reached out to you. The first time. How long ago was that?" She considered him for a moment, the mug halfway to her mouth. 2 years ago. He processed that. "You've been sitting on this for 2 years. I've been deciding for 2 years. That's different. What changed? 3 months ago, what changed?" She set the mug down, looked at the window. "Your mother," she said. "The Ricci dinner. I told you about it in the letter." "Tell me again. Tell me what she said." Something moved across her face. Reluctance, maybe. Or the particular fatigue of having to reopen something that she had already done the painful work of putting away. "She called me the following morning. After the dinner, she said that I had seated Frank Ricci next to a man he'd had a business disagreement with, and that it had created tension at the table, and that someone in my position needed to learn that these things had consequences." She said it flatly, just the facts, no emphasis. She said, "A Moreau wife understands how this works. You don't." Those were her words, exactly those words. Vincent's jaw tightened, and then she said, "And this is the part I want you to really hear, Vincent. She said that you had agreed with her, that she had spoken to you about it the night of the dinner, and that you had said you'd handle it." Evelyn looked at him. "Did you?" He didn't answer immediately, which was its own answer. "You called me the next morning," she said. "You said dinner had gone well. You asked if I'd eaten, and then you got off the phone." She picked up her mug again. "You knew what she said to me, and you decided I didn't need to know that you knew. I didn't want to make it into a bigger thing. That's not your call." Her voice stayed even, but there was iron underneath it now. "What happens to me is not something you get to downsize for my benefit. I am not one of your situations to be managed, Vincent. You keep saying that word. Managed. You manage everything. You managed your mother. You managed my feelings about her. You managed the information I received about my own marriage. And you did all of it because it was efficient, and because it kept things smooth, and because you have spent your entire life building a world where you control the variables." She paused. "I was a variable." The apartment was getting lighter. Morning was coming in from the east, gray and flat over the lake, and it was filling the kitchen with the kind of light that made everything look very clear and slightly too cold. Vincent's phone buzzed on the counter, where he'd left it the night before. They both looked at it, Ray Castellano's name on the screen. "Don't," Evelyn said. "I wasn't going to." "You were thinking about it." He was. He couldn't deny it because she could read it. She had always been able to read him, which was part of what had made her so easy to take for granted. When someone understands you completely and still stays, you start to assume the staying is unconditional. You stop asking what it costs them. He left the phone face down on the counter. Ray showed up at 7:45. Vincent had not invited him, but he hadn't needed to. Ray Castellano had been his lieutenant for 11 years, and he operated on a frequency calibrated entirely to Vincent's needs, which meant that when Vincent didn't respond to 3 messages and didn't pick up 2 calls, Ray came to the building. He had a key to the elevator. The doorman knew better than to call up first. He was 50 years old, Ray, with a broad chest, a shaved head, and the kind of face that arranged itself naturally into an expression of measured patience. He came through the front door at 7:45 and stopped in the hallway when he saw the two suitcases standing against the wall where Evelyn had left them. He looked at them for a moment. Then he walked to the kitchen. Vincent was sitting at the island. Evelyn was not in the room. She had gone to the guest room an hour earlier, telling him she needed to make calls about the postponed flight and that he should think about what he actually wanted to say to her before they spoke again. She had said it without cruelty, but with the clear-eyed practicality of someone who was giving the other person enough rope to be honest, not enough to perform. Ray looked at Vincent, at the 3 envelopes on the counter, at the untouched glass of water. "What happened?" he said. "She's leaving." Ray was quiet. "She has a job in London. She's been planning it for months. She's postponed the flight 24 hours. That's all I've got." Ray sat down slowly on the stool Evelyn had not used. He had the careful bearing of a man who understood exactly where the lines were in every situation. And this situation had lines he could feel without needing to be told about them. He had met Evelyn on 11 separate occasions over 3 years, and he had said almost nothing to her at any of them, not because he disliked her, but because she was Vincent's wife, and his job was to stay in his lane. But he had watched her. He was the kind of man who watched people. "The West Side thing," Ray said. "Caruso's crew is pushing on the distribution boundary again. They moved 2 guys onto Paulson Street last night. I need a decision by noon or it escalates." "Handle it." Ray's eyebrows moved, just slightly. In 11 years, Vincent had never said those 2 words together in that context without qualifications. "How do you want it handled?" "However keeps it from escalating. Use your judgment. You have my judgment." He looked at Ray directly. "Use it." Ray studied him for a moment. "All right," he said. "There's something else." Vincent's voice was flat. "Last night at the Monarch Club. What I said about Evelyn, about her not leaving." He paused. "Who in that room was going to talk?" Ray's expression didn't change, but something behind it sharpened. "Probably Danny Ricci. He's young, and he's got a loose relationship with a reporter at the Tribune. Marco doesn't know about it. How long before it's a story? If Danny sent something last night, it might already be moving." He checked his phone. "Yeah." He turned the screen toward Vincent. It was a gossip item on a city news aggregator. Small, 3 paragraphs, sourced to a witness at an exclusive private gathering. But it had the shape of a thing that was going to grow. Mafia boss is Vincent Moreau's wife. Reportedly preparing to leave. Sources say marriage in crisis. Vincent read it twice, so his face did not change. "It'll be picked up by the afternoon outlets by noon," Ray said. "By tonight it's on the crime desks. My mother will see it. She probably already has." As if on cue, Vincent's phone on the counter screen lit with a call. Not Ray's line. The contact name read Mom. They both looked at it. Vincent let it ring. It went to voicemail. Then it rang again immediately. "I'll go," Ray said, standing up. "Stay." Vincent picked up the phone on the 3rd call and stood up from the stool. "I'll take this in the other room." He took it in the study. He closed the door. His mother's name was Catherine Moreau, and she was 68 years old, and she had spent those 68 years developing a particular kind of authority that did not require volume. She was not a loud woman. She was precise, and she chose her words the way a surgeon chose an instrument, for what they would cut and how deep. "I saw the story," she said before he could speak. "It's a gossip item, Catherine." "Don't call me Catherine. It's 3 paragraphs. It'll be forgotten by Vincent." She said his name the way she always had, with the full weight of everything she had invested in it, everything she had built around it, everything she needed it to be. "Is it true?" He was standing at the window of the study, looking out at the city. Morning traffic moving below. People going to normal jobs and normal lives, small and purposeful at this distance. "She postponed her flight," he said. "We're talking." Silence on the line. The precise, weighted silence his mother used when she was constructing her next sentence for maximum effect. "I knew this would happen," she said. "Don't." She was never the right, "I'm going to stop you there." He said it quietly, but with the particular absolute firmness of a man who has made a decision and has stopped second-guessing it. "Whatever you are going to say, stop. Do not finish that sentence." Another silence. This one had a different texture. His mother was recalibrating. "You're upset," she said. "I found 3 letters last night that Evelyn wrote over the past year. Letters she didn't send me, that she wrote because I wasn't listening. That she wrote because the alternative was giving up entirely." He paused. "One of them was about a phone call you made to her after the Ricci dinner. What you said to her." He could hear his mother breathing. "I want you to hear me very clearly," he said. "I'm not calling to discuss the situation or get your read on it. I'm calling because I'm going to handle things with Evelyn directly, and I need you to stay out of it. No calls to her, no calls to Marco or anyone else." "No, she is making a fool of you," Catherine said. It came out controlled, but it came out fast, which told him the control was costing her something. In front of everyone. In front of people who need to respect. "She's not making a fool of me," he said. "I did that." Silence. "I did it," he said again, and the saying of it a second time was different from the first. The first was defensive, the second was something starting to be understood. "She has been telling me for years, and I was not paying attention, and I did it. Whatever happens with her reputation, or my reputation, or the business, I did it." He stopped. "I need you to apologize to her." "I beg your pardon. What you said to her, after the Ricci dinner, and everything else, all of it, across 3 years, I need you to call her and apologize." "Vincent, if you can't do that, or if you won't do that, then I need some distance from you for a while. I mean it." He said it without heat and without drama, the way he said everything that he absolutely meant. "She is my wife, and I should have protected her from you a long time ago, and I didn't. This is me starting to." He could hear his mother's breathing on the line. It was a long moment. "She has changed you," Catherine said finally, and her voice had gone cold. Not angry cold, but the removed, dignified cold of a woman who has decided to feel wounded on her own time. "I'm hoping she has," Vincent said. "I'll talk to you later." He hung up. He stood at the window for a moment with the phone in his hand. His chest felt tight. He had been managing his mother for 41 years, and it had never felt like managing. It had felt like navigation, like the natural negotiation of a complicated terrain. But hearing himself now, hearing the way he'd just spoken to her, he could feel the exact shape of what he had been doing for 3 years, standing between Catherine Moreau and his wife, and tilting toward his mother every single time. Not dramatically, not cruelly, just consistently, quietly, in all the small decisions that accumulated into a pattern Evelyn had to live inside. He went back to the kitchen. Ray was still there. Evelyn had come back. She was at the far counter with her phone and a legal pad, and she looked up when Vincent came in. She registered something in his face that made her go still. "Was that your mother?" she said. "Yes." "What did she want?" "To tell me you were embarrassing the family." He looked at her evenly. "I told her she owed you an apology. I told her I needed distance from her if she wouldn't give it." Evelyn stared at him. Ray, with the long-practiced instinct of a man who knew when to disappear, stood up from the stool. "I'll handle Caruso," he said, and he walked out of the kitchen and down the hallway and out the front door without looking at either of them. Evelyn set her phone face down on the counter. Her legal pad had flight options written on it in her precise handwriting. Times, alternatives, connection routes. She looked at it for a moment and then she looked at Vincent. "What are you doing?" she said. Quiet. Not accusing. Genuinely asking. "I don't know yet," he said. "I'm trying to figure out what I should have been doing for 3 years and do it today, which I understand is not—" He stopped himself, started again. "I know it doesn't fix anything. I know one phone call to my mother doesn't balance what you've been dealing with. I'm not saying it does." "Then what are you saying?" "I'm saying I didn't know what I didn't know, and now I know it, and I can't go backward." He stood in the center of the kitchen, and he looked tired. Not the tiredness of a man who hadn't slept, but the deeper, more structural tiredness of someone who has just understood a weight they have been carrying in the wrong direction for a very long time. "What do I do, Evelyn? Tell me what to actually do." She was quiet for a moment that stretched. "Tell me something true," she said. "Not strategic, not calibrated. Just, what are you actually feeling right now?" He looked at his hands. This was not a thing he was practiced at. He had spent his adult life constructing an interior that was useful, not transparent, A kind of self that could sit in the Monarch Club and read the room and make every correct decision without ever exposing what any of it cost. He had built that self deliberately, and he had maintained it with discipline, and it had served him extraordinarily well in every room he'd ever needed to survive. He had simply never considered that it was also functioning in his own kitchen with his own wife at 6 a.m. "I'm scared," he said. She waited. "I'm scared that I've been the kind of man that I would not respect in someone else." He got the words out with difficulty, not because he was performing difficulty, but because the words were true, and true things in his experience required care. "I read those letters and I didn't recognize the marriage in them. That's the part I can't get past. I thought I knew what we had, and I didn't know anything about what we actually had. And that means I've been living in a version of this that was mine and not real." Boss-san. He looked at her. "How do you apologize for that?" "I don't even know how to start apologizing for that." Evelyn's face had changed, not softened. That was the wrong word. Something in it had become more present, less managed. She was looking at him the way she had not looked at him in a very long time, which was directly, with both eyes, without the slight protective adjustment she had been making for months. "You start," she said carefully, "by understanding that I don't need an apology. I need to see who you are after the apology. The words don't do anything. The words are easy." She picked up her legal pad and looked at the flight times and then set it down again. "I want to ask you something, and I need you to not answer it the way you would answer a question you want to get right. I need you to answer it honestly, even if the honest answer is not what you want to say. Okay? If I had not been leaving, if you had not found those letters, if this had gone on the way it was going, would you have changed? On your own? Without this?" She gestured, a small movement that took in the whole night, the letters, the suitcases in the hall. "Would you have changed?" He looked at her for a long time. "No," he said. She nodded once. It was not the nod of someone who has been hurt by an answer. It was the nod of someone who needed a true answer and got one. "That's the problem," she said. "That's the whole problem, Vincent. You're a good man in a crisis. You're exceptional in a crisis. But our life was not supposed to be a crisis. It was supposed to be ordinary. Tuesday mornings and forgetting to buy milk, and what do you want to do this weekend? And in that, in the ordinary, you were absent for years. And I don't know if you can be present in the ordinary. I don't know if it's in you." She stopped. Outside, the city was in full mourning now, the gray burning off and the light going sharp and clear over the lake. Traffic sounds from 40 floors down. The particular hum of Chicago existing as it always had, indifferent and enormous, with no opinion about what happened in this kitchen. Evelyn's phone rang on the counter. She looked at the screen and her expression changed. Something complicated went through it, something that Vincent couldn't fully read. She picked it up and walked toward the hallway. "I need to take this," she said. "Who is it?" She paused for one moment in the kitchen doorway and looked back at him. "It's Margaret Hartwell," she said. "My new employer. Someone sent her the gossip item this morning. She wants to know if I'm still coming." She walked down the hallway. He heard the guest room door close. He stood alone in the kitchen. His mother had already seen the story. His business was alive in every outlet that covered organized crime in this city, sniffing around a scandal. The woman he'd been married to for 3 years was on the phone with the person who represented her escape route, and all he had between himself and the complete public unraveling of everything he had built was 24 hours that he had already burned 6 of. He picked up his phone. There were 11 missed messages, 2 from Ray, 3 from attorneys, 1 from Marco Ricci, 1 from Callum Drexler. And at the bottom of the list, sent 40 minutes ago, a name he had not expected. Danny Ricci. He opened it. "I'm sorry, Vincent. I didn't think it would move that fast. My editor friend. I didn't tell him your name. I swear he put it together himself. I'm sorry. I tried to pull it, but it was already live." Vincent read it twice, slowly. He set the phone down. He thought about what it meant. Not the apology, not the explanation, but the shape of the thing itself. The story was out. His mother knew. His entire network knew. Every crime desk in the city was going to be making calls today. By this afternoon, there would be reporters outside the building. By tonight, the narrative of the Mafia boss whose wife was leaving him would be the story, the angle, the shape of how everyone who needed to fear him would be thinking about him. And in the guest room down the hall, Evelyn was on the phone with London. He picked up his phone and he did something he had not done in 11 years without Ray present and a strategy already in place. He called a journalist, not a friendly one, not a contact. He called the Tribune's lead crime reporter, a woman named Daniela Cross, who had been trying to get him on record for 4 years. And when she answered on the second ring with poorly concealed shock, he said, "Ms. Cross, I'd like to make a statement on record today." There was a pause. "Mr. Moreau," she said, "I'm listening." "The story that's running about my marriage is accurate," he said. "My wife is considering leaving because I have not been the husband she deserved. That is not her failure. That is mine. I'll answer whatever questions you have about my personal accountability. I won't answer questions about my business." Another pause. He could hear her processing it, recalibrating, reaching for the recorder she'd had ready for 4 years. "When and where?" she said. He gave her the address of a cafe 3 blocks from the building. He gave her 2 hours. He hung up. He sat with the phone in his hand for a moment. He could hear distantly the low murmur of Evelyn's voice through the guest room door. He could not make out the words. The tone was steady and professional. The voice she used when she was working, the voice he had heard less and less of in 3 years as she had gradually submerged it under the quieter, more careful register she used in his world. He thought about what she had asked him. "Would you have changed? On your own?" No. The answer was still no, and it would have been no, and she knew that, and he knew that, and the only thing left was what happened now. Not what he said, not what he promised, but what he actually did with the small amount of time she had given him. He had 24 hours, and he had already spent 6 of them in retrograde, and it was time to stop talking about changing and start. He was still holding the phone when Evelyn came back into the kitchen. She stopped in the doorway. She had the legal pad in her hand, and her expression had shifted. The phone call with Margaret Hartwell had done something to her posture, straightened it, returned something professional and certain to the set of her shoulders that Vincent recognized as the version of her that existed before him. The version he had been slowly crowding out for 3 years without meaning to and without noticing. "Margaret is flexible," Evelyn said. "She can push the start date 2 weeks if I need it." She paused. "She also told me the story is running on 3 more outlets now. She wanted to make sure it wouldn't affect my ability to do the job." "What did you tell her?" "I told her it wouldn't." She looked at him. "What are you doing with your phone?" "I called Daniela Cross at the Tribune." The legal pad stopped moving in her hand. "You called? Why?" "Because the story is out and it's going to become whatever the outlets want it to be unless I say something first." He set the phone on the counter. "I told her the story was accurate, that you're considering leaving, that it's my fault, not yours. I'm meeting her in 2 hours. Evelyn stared at him. "You're going on record," she said. Flat, not a question. "Yes." To a journalist, to the Tribune. "You, Vincent Moreau, are going to sit in front of Daniela Cross and tell her that your wife is leaving you and it's your fault." "That's the plan." She set the legal pad on the counter very carefully, the way she handled things when her hands needed something to do while her mind caught up. She looked at the window. She looked at the legal pad. She looked at him. "That will destroy your reputation," she said. "In your world, with those men, with Marco and Drexler and everyone who sat in that room last night when you said I would never leave. You go on record about this and you hand every one of them a story about Vincent Moreau losing control of his own house. I know. They will use it." "I know that too." She was quiet. He could see her working through it. Not emotionally, but analytically, the way her mind actually functioned when she let it, processing variables and outcomes with the kind of unsentimental precision that had made her exceptional at her job before she had put her job aside to be excellent at being his wife instead. "Why?" she said. Because you asked me if I would have changed on my own, and the answer was no. And that means the only way I know how to show you that I'm changing now is to do something that I cannot take back, something that costs me something real. He looked at her steadily. "The interview costs me something real." She held his gaze for a long moment. Then she picked up her legal pad and walked back toward the guest room without another word. And he could not tell. He genuinely could not tell whether what had just moved across her face was the beginning of something or the end of it. The cafe was called Arden's. It was 3 blocks north of the Vandermeer, small and warm, with steamed-up windows and the smell of dark roast coffee and the particular acoustic quality of a room full of people who weren't paying attention to anyone else. Vincent arrived 8 minutes early and sat at a corner table with his back to the wall, which was the only way he ever sat anywhere. Daniela Cross arrived at 9:58. She was 44, compact, with short dark hair, and the alert, unhurried eyes of someone who had interviewed powerful men for 20 years and had stopped being impressed by any of them. She carried a shoulder bag and a small recorder and a notebook, and she sat down across from him with the practiced neutrality of someone who understood that the value of this moment depended entirely on not frightening the source. "Mr. Moreau," she said. "Miss Cross." She set the recorder on the table between them, visible, deliberate. "You said on record." "On record." She clicked it on. "I want to start with what you told me on the phone. You said the story running about your marriage is accurate. Can you say that again here, for the record?" "Yes. My wife is considering leaving our marriage. She postponed her departure by 24 hours. Whether she stays or goes is her decision entirely." He said it without hesitation, without the slight throat clearing or redirection that marked a man managing a statement. He said it the way he said things he had decided. "I am not going to dispute the reporting. The marriage has been in serious difficulty for some time, and that is my responsibility." Daniela Cross wrote something even though the recorder was running. "When you say your responsibility, I mean I was not the husband she needed. I was present physically and absent in every way that actually mattered. I allowed my work and my family, my mother specifically, to diminish my wife over a period of years, and I did not intervene in that the way I should have." He stopped. The next part was harder, and he took a breath before it. "I didn't know her. Not the way a man should know his wife after 5 years. That's not a metaphor. I didn't know her birthday without being reminded. I didn't know what she drank in the morning. I didn't know what she wanted from her career or her life. I knew she was there. I treated that as sufficient." "Well, He paused. "It wasn't." Daniela Cross was watching him with an expression that was almost, but not quite, compassion. She was too professional for compassion in this context, but something human had flickered in it. "This is an unusual statement for a man in your position." "I imagine it is. You understand that the people you do business with will see this." "I made the call," he said. "I understand what it means." She asked him 4 more questions. He answered all of them with the same directness. No pivots, no spin, no subtle reframing that left him technically accurate but strategically protected. When she asked what he hoped would happen, he said he hoped Evelyn would stay, but that he understood if she didn't. When she asked whether he was stepping back from his business operations, he said he was delegating authority to his lieutenant and taking personal time. He did not elaborate on the word business, and she did not push it, because she was smart enough to know which doors were open and which ones would end the conversation. It took 31 minutes. When she clicked off the recorder, she looked at him for a moment without her journalist face. "Off the record," she said. "Go ahead. Does she know you're doing this?" "She knows I was coming here. That's not what I asked." He looked at the steamed window. Outside, Chicago was doing its mid-morning thing, purposeful, indifferent. "She knows," he said. "What she doesn't know is whether it matters." He stood up. "Run it, however serves the story. That's your job." He left the cafe and walked back toward the Vandermeer with his hands in his coat pockets and the cold October air on his face, and he counted the ways in which the next 12 hours were going to go badly. Marco would call, Drexler would call, his attorney would call. His mother would already have seen it before it published, because Catherine Moreau had sources in every media organization in the city that owed the Moreau name something. The business would register the interview as a disruption. There would be questions about stability, about control, about whether the empire had a hand at the wheel. He accepted all of that. He walked back into the building and took the elevator upstairs and accepted all of it. What he was not prepared for was Ray Castellano standing in the penthouse hallway with a look on his face that Vincent had seen exactly twice in 11 years. The specific contained expression Ray used when the information he was carrying was the kind that changed the shape of everything. "Close the door," Vincent said. Ray closed the front door. He had a phone in his hand. He turned the screen toward Vincent. It was a photograph. High resolution, time-stamped from 40 minutes ago, pulled from a private security feed that Ray had access to through channels that didn't need to be specified. The location tag in the metadata put it at the lobby of 800 North Michigan, a building Vincent knew well, because the third floor of that building housed the regional office of a federal organized crime task force. In the photograph, walking through the lobby toward the elevator bank, carrying a leather briefcase and wearing the coat Vincent had seen hanging by the guest room door that morning, was Ray's second-in-command, a man named Paul Gentry. A man Vincent had personally vouched for 18 months ago when Ray had brought him up from mid-level operations. A man who had been in 4 closed-door meetings in the past 6 months where things had been discussed that could not survive federal attention. "How long?" Vincent said. His voice was completely level. "I don't know," Ray said. "Minimum 6 months based on the feed access I have. Could be longer." "How much does he know?" "Everything from the past 6 months. Possibly more." Ray paused. "The Caruso negotiation, the Pilsen reorganization, the arrangement with the Westfield storage facilities." Another pause. "The conversation at the Monarch Club last Thursday about the Ricci expansion." The Ricci expansion was not a conversation that could survive federal attention. Marco Ricci was 63 years old, and he had been careful for 30 years, specifically because he understood that one wrong document in the wrong hands meant the rest of his life in a room he couldn't leave. "Does Marco know?" Vincent said. "Not yet. Keep it that way until I tell you to tell him." He took the phone from Ray and looked at the photograph again. Paul Gentry in the lobby of a federal building, carrying the briefcase he used for things that required discretion, walking toward an elevator with the calm, purposeful stride of a man who knew exactly where he was going and had been going there for a long time. Where is he now? Back at his office in River North. He came back 30 minutes after this was taken, acting normal. "Let him keep acting normal." Vincent handed the phone back. "I need to think." "Vincent," Ray said his name with a weight that meant there was more. "Say it. The task force has had an active file on you for 14 months. I know this because I have someone inside their support staff. What I did not know until this morning is that the file has moved from surveillance to preparation." He paused. "They're preparing a case. Gentry is the mechanism. If they have 6 months of his access plus whatever he's given them from before." He stopped. The sentence didn't need finishing. Vincent stood in his own hallway with this information and did not move for a long moment. The suitcases were still against the wall where Evelyn had left them. He could hear nothing from the guest room. She was either on the phone still or doing what she did when she needed to think, which was sit in silence and let her mind work. He had learned this about her in the past 12 hours in a way he had not learned it in 3 years of marriage. He needed to call his attorney. He needed to call Marco through a clean line. He needed to make a decision about Paul Gentry that was measured and untraceable, and that protected the organization without creating the kind of visible disruption that would tell the task force they had been burned. He needed to do all of this in the next several hours while also keeping whatever fragile and uncertain thing was happening with Evelyn from collapsing entirely. He needed to be 2 entirely different men simultaneously, and he was not sure he had enough of either one left. "Go back to River North," he said to Ray. "Watch him. Don't approach. Don't let him know anything has changed. I'll call you in 3 hours." Ray left. Vincent stood in the hallway. He looked at the suitcases. He thought about the interview. It would go live within the hour. Daniela Cross ran things fast. It was part of what made her dangerous and valuable. The statement was out there now, irrevocable, already in the hands of a woman who was very good at her job. The business would absorb it. His people would absorb it. That was manageable. Paul Gentry was not manageable in the same way. He went to his study and sat down and called his attorney on a clean phone and spoke for 11 minutes in careful, oblique language about hypothetical situations involving federal preparation and organizational exposure. And his attorney said the things attorneys say when they understand the situation perfectly well and need to stay in a position of deniability while still being useful. Vincent listened. He asked 2 specific questions. He hung up. Then he sat in the study and did something that was not strategic and not useful and not part of any plan. He put his face in his hands. Not for long. 20 seconds, maybe 30. But he sat there with his palms against his eyes, and he felt fully and without management the complete weight of what the morning had become. The interview was done. The federal file was real. His wife was in the guest room with her bags packed and a legal pad of flight times. His mother was somewhere in Lincoln Park being furious in her precise and architectural way. His organization, the thing he had spent 20 years building, the thing that was supposed to be the proof that he was his father's son and his own man simultaneously, was bleeding from an internal wound he had not seen coming. He had spent 41 years being the man who saw everything coming. He took his face out of his hands. He straightened up. He sat for a moment in the posture of someone who is deciding what kind of person to be in the next chapter. And it was not a comfortable posture because it required him to know what kind of person he actually was, which was something he was learning this morning with the grinding, late-arriving clarity of a man who has confused control for understanding his entire life. He got up. He went to the kitchen. He put the kettle on. He did it the way he'd watched Evelyn do it an hour ago. Specific burner, specific amount of water, the pause while it heated. He went to the cabinet and found the tea. Earl Grey. It was on the second shelf behind the regular coffee, in a small tin with a hinged lid that she kept sealed, and it had been there for the entire 3 years of this apartment, and he had never opened it once. He opened it now. The smell was immediate and particular, and it hit him somewhere that was not strategic or intellectual. Bergamot and something dry and floral. The smell of 1,000 mornings he had been somewhere else for. He was still standing there with the tin in his hands when Evelyn came into the kitchen. She stopped. She looked at him, at the kettle, at the tin, at the specific, unpracticed way he was holding it. Something moved across her face that she did not immediately close off. "I read the interview," she said. "It posted." That was fast. "She's good at her job." Evelyn came to the counter and stood a few feet from him. "You said everything. You didn't protect yourself at all." "No?" "Marco Ricci called me," she said. He went still. 40 minutes ago. On my cell." She held his gaze. "He wanted to know if I was all right. He said—" She paused. "He said his wife has been worried about me for 2 years, and he should have said something sooner." She pressed her lips together. "He said you were a fool, and he hoped you were fixing it." Vincent looked at the tin of tea in his hands. "He also said," Evelyn continued, her voice going careful in the way it did when she was carrying something she wasn't sure how to put down, "that there's talk, in the network, about the interview, about what it means for you." She paused. "He said Drexler called him this morning. He said some of the people in your organization are treating this as a signal, about your state of mind, about whether you're still—" She stopped. "Whether you're still you." He looked up. Her face was serious, not frightened. Evelyn did not do frightened the way other people did. But there was a gravity in her expression that had nothing to do with their marriage. "Vincent," she said, "is something else happening?" He looked at her. He had a choice in this moment. He could see its shape clearly, the way he could see the shape of choices in rooms full of men who were all making calculations simultaneously. He could give her the answer that protected her from information that was safer not to know. He could manage it. He could tell her that the interview was the only fire and let her believe it. He had been making that choice for 3 years. "Yes," he said, "something else is happening." She waited. "I can't tell you all of it. I need you to understand that's not me managing you. There are things I can't tell you specifically, because knowing them would put you in a position you don't want to be in." He set the tin down. "But someone inside my organization has been cooperating with a federal task force for months, possibly longer. I found out an hour ago." Evelyn was very still. "The task force has an active case. If what this person has given them is as complete as I think it is—" He stopped. He was not a man who finished that kind of sentence out loud, but he didn't need to. Evelyn was not a woman who needed things spelled out. "How bad?" she said. "Bad enough that everything changes," he said. "The organization, my exposure, everything I've been running." He paused. "Everything." The kitchen was quiet. The kettle was close to boiling. Outside the windows, Chicago was fully in its mid-morning self, bright and cold and enormous. I told Ray to delegate authority to handle the Caruso situation, he said. I told my mother to stay out of it. I gave an interview admitting fault to a journalist who has been trying to reach me for 4 years. He looked at her. I did all of that in the last 4 hours. And now I'm standing here telling you that the empire I chose over everything else is burning from the inside, and I don't. He stopped. And what crossed his face was not fear and not strategy, but something raw and undefended that she had not seen on him in so long she had almost forgotten it was possible. I don't know which fire to go to first. Evelyn looked at him for a long moment. Then she went to the cabinet. She took down a second mug. She poured hot water into both of them, added the tea, and she put one mug in front of him on the counter, and she wrapped her hands around the other one, and she said, "Tell me what you need." It was a simple sentence, 4 words. But it landed in the kitchen with the weight of everything it had never been in 3 years. She asking him instead of him assuming, her toward him instead of the permanent, patient distance she had been keeping while she wrote letters she didn't send. He looked at the mug in front of him. He looked at her. And that was the exact moment his phone began ringing. Not the clean phone he'd used for his attorney, but his regular phone, vibrating hard on the counter. He looked at the screen. It was Paul Gentry. Not Ray. Not Marco. Not his attorney. Paul Gentry, calling from his River North office, with the calm regularity of a man who had no idea he'd been found, who was calling his boss on a normal Wednesday morning like it was a normal Wednesday morning. And every instinct Vincent had, every honed, calibrated survival-level instinct, told him that the call was not normal. That Gentry calling now, after the interview had posted, after the morning he'd been having, was not coincidence. That Gentry had been watching too. That Gentry knew the organization was distracted. That Gentry was checking, the way informants check, to see if the ground had shifted under his. He let it ring. 4 rings. 5. The phone vibrated against the counter with the particular urgency of a thing that needed answering. And he stood there and watched it ring and did not touch it, and on the 6th ring it stopped. Evelyn was watching him. "That was Gentry," he said. "The one who—" Yes. She didn't ask the next question. She had the specific intelligence of someone who understood that in certain situations the next question was not hers to ask, and she let the silence hold while he thought. He was looking at the phone the way he looked at things that were simultaneously problems and information. Not with hostility, but with the cold, functional attention of a man reading a situation for what it actually was, rather than what it appeared to be. Gentry calling now meant one of 2 things. Either he was running a normal check-in and had no idea the photograph existed, which meant the task force hadn't told him he was burned, which meant they were still in build mode and hadn't moved to arrest phase yet. Or he knew something had shifted, not the photograph specifically, but the texture of the morning, Vincent's interview, the disruption in the organization's usual silence. And he was probing, feeling the edges of the room in the dark. Either way, calling back immediately was wrong. Calling back too late was also wrong. There was a specific window, the window of a man who was busy but not avoiding, and Vincent calculated it the way he calculated everything. And then he picked up his own regular phone and he called Ray. "He called me," Vincent said when Ray picked up. "I know, I'm watching him." Ray's voice was low, controlled. "He made 2 calls after yours went to voicemail. One to an outside number I don't recognize yet. One to—" a pause. "One to the federal building, main line, not the task force direct, but it routes." So Gentry knew the ground had moved. "He's accelerating," Vincent said. "That's what it looks like." "How long before they move on what they have?" "My contact says days. Maybe less if Gentry tells them the organization is in transition and now is the window." "Okay." He said it the way he said everything when the decision was already made, and what remained was execution. "Here's what I need. I need a meeting with Marco today. Not on the phone. In person. Clean location. No staff. You and me and him and Danny." He paused. "And I need you to find out who Gentry called on that outside number." "Done." A beat. "Vincent." "Say it. You understand that if Gentry tells them you're compromised and distracted, I understand. They could move today. Not days. Today." "I understand, Ray." He said it with absolute steadiness. "Set the Marco meeting for noon. I'll be there." He hung up. He looked at Evelyn. She was still holding her mug. She had heard enough of both sides of both calls that she understood the shape of the problem even without the specifics. She was not panicking. That was one of the things he had never adequately understood about her. She did not panic. She processed. "I have to go out," he said. 2, maybe 3 hours. "I know. I'm not. This isn't me choosing the business over this. Over you." He stopped because the sentence was incomplete and she deserved a complete sentence. "I have people whose exposure is my responsibility. I created this situation and I have to manage the fallout so that the people in it don't go down because I was distracted." "I know, Vincent." She set down her mug. "Go. You'll be here." It was not quite a question and not quite an instruction, and she heard both things in it. She looked at him for a moment with the clear-eyed patience she had been carrying all morning. "I told you 24 hours, she said. "You have 14 left. Go do what you need to do." He picked up his coat from the chair. Dum. The meeting with Marco Ricci happened in the back room of a butcher shop on West Fulton that Marco had owned through a shell company for 15 years. It smelled of cold air and iron and the particular sensory weight of a space that had hosted serious conversations for a long time. Marco was already there when Vincent arrived at 12:04. He was sitting at a metal table with a cup of coffee he wasn't drinking, and Danny was standing near the door with his hands in his pockets, looking like a man who was aware that he had caused part of this morning and had not yet been told what the consequence would be. Ray came in behind Vincent and closed the door. Marco looked at Vincent for a long moment without speaking. Then he said, "You look like you haven't slept." "I haven't." "Sit down." Vincent sat. Ray stayed standing near the back wall. Danny didn't move from the door. "The interview," Marco said, "is done. It's out." "I read it." Marco picked up his coffee, looked at it, put it down. "You know what Drexler said when he read it?" "I can guess. He said you'd lost your mind." Marco's voice was flat. Not unkind, but flat in the way of a man delivering information without editorial. He said a man who makes a public statement about his marriage being his fault is a man who's performing weakness for an audience, and that the only reason a man in your position performs weakness is because he's building a cover story for something else. He paused. "He thinks you're preparing to cooperate." The room was very quiet. "Drexler thinks I'm the informant," Vincent said. "He's not the only one." Marco looked at him steadily. "You went on record this morning talking about stepping back from operations, delegating authority, admitting personal disruption. You did that while a federal organized crime task force has an active file on your organization." He stopped. "You understand how that reads?" "I understand exactly how it reads." Vincent put both hands flat on the metal table. "Which is why I'm sitting here telling you directly that it is not what it is. The interview was about my marriage, period. What I'm about to tell you now is the actual problem." He looked at Marco and then at Danny. "Paul Gentry has been cooperating with the federal task force for a minimum of 6 months, possibly longer. He walked into the federal building on North Michigan this morning at 9:15. Ray has the photograph." "Boss, boy." Ray put the phone on the table. Marco looked at it. He did not pick it up. He looked at it the way old men in his business looked at things that confirmed fears they had been carefully not thinking about, with a kind of grim internal recognition that was worse than surprise. Danny had gone pale near the door. 6 months, Marco said. Minimum. The Pilsen reorganization was in a closed meeting Gentry attended. Marco was quiet for a long moment. Vincent watched him process it. Not the emotion of it. Marco had too much practice for visible emotion, but the structural implications, the architecture of exposure, the specific geography of who knew what and when. Marco had been in this business for 30 years by being exceptionally good at exactly this kind of triage. "What do you need from me?" Marco said finally. "I need you to know it was him and not me," Vincent said. "Everything else I can handle, but I need you to know that, and I need you to tell Drexler, because if Drexler spends the next 48 hours thinking I'm the source, he'll do something that makes all of this worse." "I'll handle Drexler." Marco picked up the phone and looked at the photograph for a long time. Then he set it down and looked at Vincent. "And the task force. Their case. My attorney is working on the exposure assessment. It'll take a few days." Vincent paused. I'm going to delegate the operational authority to Ray, fully, while this resolves. I'm going to step back. Marco's eyes didn't change. Step back. Yes. Permanently. The word landed between them on the metal table and neither of them looked away. I don't know yet, Vincent said. It was the most honest answer he had, and Marco, who had known him for 20 years, heard the honesty in it and nodded once in the way of a man who understood that some decisions weren't made at tables like this. Danny spoke from near the door. I'm sorry. His voice was too young-sounding for the room, slightly strangled. The reporter, I didn't think... Danny. Marco said his son's name with a single syllable of absolute finality, and Danny closed his mouth. Vincent looked at him. You learn from it, Vincent said. That's all. He stood up. He looked at Ray. Set up the Gentry situation the way we discussed. Clean, no noise. I want it handled before end of day. Ray nodded. Vincent buttoned his coat. He looked at Marco one more time, at the 63-year-old face of a man who had been his father's ally and his own, who had sat in enough rooms like this one to understand every texture of what was happening here, who had called Evelyn this morning to ask if she was all right. Thank you, Vincent said, for calling her. Marco looked at him for a moment. Go home, he said. He was back at the Vandermeer by 2:15. The elevator ride up was 42 floors, and he spent it standing very still with his hand loose at his side, not looking at his phone, not running calculations, just breathing, in and out. The particular discipline of a man who understood that he was about to walk back into the most important conversation of his life after spending 3 hours in the most dangerous professional situation of his life, and that the version of himself required for each of those things was not the same version, and that the transition needed to be real, not performed. The elevator opened. Evelyn was in the living room. She had moved her bags from the hallway to the center of the room, both of them, and she was sitting on the sofa with her phone face down on the cushion beside her and her hands in her lap. And the specific quality of how she was sitting, the uprightness of it, the deliberate stillness, told him immediately that something had happened while he was gone. He stopped in the entry. What happened? She looked at him. Her eyes were dry. That was the first thing he registered. She had not been crying. Evelyn almost never cried. It was one of the things about her he had occasionally misread as coldness, which he now understood was not coldness at all, but simply a different architecture of feeling. But her face had the quality it got when she had made a decision. He had only seen that quality twice before. Once when she had told him she was stepping back from her career, and once last night in the bedroom. Your mother came, she said. He went still. She called from the lobby at 1:30. I let her up because... She paused. I don't know why I let her up. I think I needed to see what she would do. He said nothing. His jaw was tight. She came in and she stood in this room and she looked at the bags and she said... Evelyn's voice was exactly level, the forced levelness of someone recalling something that required effort to report without heat. She said that I had always been a temporary arrangement, that you would come to your senses, that women like me didn't last in families like yours, and that your father had affairs the entire length of his marriage to her, and your grandfather before that, and that this was simply how men like you were built. She stopped. She said the interview was the most embarrassing thing a Moreau man had ever done, and that you had done it because I had manipulated you into a compromised emotional state. The silence in the room was different from any silence it had held yet. I asked her to leave, Evelyn said. She left. Vincent crossed the room in 8 steps and picked up his phone and called his mother, and she answered on the first ring. And he said, if you ever come to my home without my invitation again, I will not speak to you for a year, not a week. A year. Do you understand me? He did not wait for her to respond. And what you said to my wife today is the end of something. I need you to understand that what you said today is the end of something between you and me that I'm not going to rebuild unless you work for it. Are we clear? He listened for 4 seconds. Then he said, I'll call you when I'm ready. And he hung up. He put the phone in his coat pocket. Evelyn was watching him. Something in her face had shifted during the call. Something tight had released, fractionally, the way a wire gives slightly when the tension on it changes. She's not going to apologize, Evelyn said. Not bitterly, just fact. Not today, he said. Maybe not for a long time, but she knows exactly what it costs her not to. He pulled off his coat and dropped it over the back of a chair and stood in the center of the living room with the afternoon light coming gray through the windows. How are you? I've been better. Tell me where you are right now, not what I want to hear. Where you actually are. She looked at him for a moment. Then she looked at the bags in the center of the room. I'm in between, she said. I've been in between since about 8 this morning. The interview, that moved something. I won't pretend it didn't. She paused. But moving something is not the same as fixing something, and I need you to understand that difference. I understand it. Do you? She stood up from the sofa. She was still in the blazer from this morning, and she had the controlled energy of someone who had been sitting with an enormous decision for a very long time and was tired in a way that sleep didn't fix. Because here's what I know about you, Vincent. You are extraordinary in a crisis. I've watched you manage things that would break other men, and you do it without breaking. And there's a version of this where you treat me like a crisis, where you focus everything you have on this problem, on me, until it's resolved, and then the focus shifts back to whatever the next thing is. And I go back to being background. And I've already lived that version. I'm not going to live it again. He looked at her. He felt the truth of it, not as an accusation, but as a map. She was showing him the exact terrain he needed to navigate, and she was doing it because she wanted him to navigate it correctly, which was its own form of hope, even if she wasn't ready to call it that. I'm not going to insult you by promising I'm a different person than the one who lived those 3 years, he said. I can't promise you that. I don't know with certainty who I am on a random Tuesday 3 months from now. I can't see that. He stopped. He thought about the butcher shop, about Marco's face reading the photograph, about the organization bleeding from the inside, about Paul Gentry walking into a federal building with a briefcase full of information about a world Vincent had spent 20 years building. What I can tell you is that the world I built, the empire, the reputation, all of it, I've been finding out today what it actually costs. Not in money, what it costs in terms of what it required me to be. And I don't... He stopped, and the words came with difficulty in the way true things came with difficulty. I don't like what it required me to be. I don't respect what it required me to be, and I cannot fix what it did to us while I'm still inside it. Evelyn was very still. I want to walk away from it, he said, not as a gesture, not as the price of keeping you, but because I've been sitting with those letters since 4 this morning, and I've been in those rooms today, and I've been looking at the version of my life that everyone else could see clearly. Ray, Marco, even my attorney. And I've been looking at what I actually have to show for 20 years of running an organization that I told myself justified everything it required. He looked at her directly, steadily, with no management and no strategy and no construction. It doesn't justify anything, and it took you leaving to make me see it, which is the most expensive education I've ever gotten. Evelyn's breath had changed slightly. Just slightly, a fractional deepening, barely visible. But he was paying attention now in a way he had not paid attention in 3 years, and he saw it. If I stay, she said. Her voice was careful, deliberate. If I cancel the flight and I stay, it cannot be the same. Not modified, not adjusted, not managed differently. It has to be structurally different. You understand what I mean by that. Tell me what you mean by it. I mean therapy. Real therapy. Not once and then stopped because it was uncomfortable. Sustained, both of us. She held his gaze. I mean, my career is mine. My London position, whether we're in London or wherever we are, my career goes with me. You don't get a vote in where it takes me. You can have a conversation, but you do not get a vote. Understood. I mean equal partnership. In this home, in decisions about our life, in where we live and how we live. Not you deciding and me adapting. She paused. And I mean Chicago. She looked at the windows, the skyline, the lake. I don't think we survived Chicago, Vincent. I think Chicago is the architecture of everything that went wrong. Your family is here. Your organization is here. Your reputation is here. And every time we try to build something different, those walls are right outside the windows. She paused. I want to go somewhere that's ours, not yours, not your family's. Ours. He was quiet for a moment. "Where?" he said. "I don't know yet. Somewhere where you're not Vincent Moreau, the Mafia boss. Somewhere where I'm not the Mafia boss's wife." She looked at him. "Somewhere we start from nothing and build something real." He looked at her. He thought about the organization, the exposure, the federal file, the arrangements already in motion to transfer authority to Ray, the lawyer working the assessment. He thought about 20 years of infrastructure, 20 years of loyalty and fear, and the intricate, brutal architecture of an empire. He thought about letting all of it go, not managing the transition, not keeping a hand in it from a distance, actually letting it go, turning it over to Ray permanently, and walking out of it and not walking back. The thought landed differently than he expected. He had anticipated grief. He had anticipated the specific resistant grief of a man who has built a thing and is being asked to abandon it. What he felt instead was something that was almost relief, like putting down a weight he had been carrying so long that he had stopped noticing it was a weight. "Okay," he said. She studied him. "Okay, I mean it, Evelyn. I'll delegate the organization to Ray today, fully, permanently. I'll work with the attorney to manage the legal exposure, and then I'm done. Clean." He paused. "I'll go wherever you say." Her eyes didn't leave his face. She was reading him the way she always had, completely, without giving him credit for performing and without punishing him for imperfection. And he stood still for it, let her read him, nothing closed. "I need to know one more thing," she said. "Ask it. The situation this morning, the federal thing. How bad is it for you personally?" He held her gaze. "My attorney thinks I have exposure. The case they're building, if Gentry has given them what I think he's given them, there's a meaningful chance it reaches me directly." He paused. "There's also a meaningful chance it doesn't. He's working on it, but I'm telling you honestly that I don't know yet." She absorbed that. The specific gravity of it. Not just the marriage, not just Chicago, but the possibility of something with legal consequences. Something that could follow them wherever they went. "I'm not going to pretend that doesn't change things," she said. "I know. But I'm also not going to—" She stopped, and something crossed her face that was too complex to name cleanly. Something that had love in it, and fury in it, and grief in it, and the particular durable quality of a woman who had made decisions from the inside of hard situations before and had not broken. "I'm not going to walk away because it got legally complicated. That's not—" She stopped again. "That's not the person I am." He looked at her. Outside, the afternoon light was thinning toward the gray of early evening. Chicago was doing what Chicago did. Relentless, enormous, indifferent to the specific drama of any single building or any single marriage. The lake was dark and wide and endlessly indifferent. His phone buzzed in his coat pocket. He looked at it. Ray's number. He showed the screen to Evelyn without speaking. She looked at it. She nodded once. He answered. "Ray, it's done." Ray's voice was flat and complete. "Gentry, he's been handled. He's been removed from every access point, and his contact at the federal building has been notified through a back channel that their source is burned. My legal contact says it sets their timeline back significantly." A pause. "Also, the outside number he called this morning, it was Catherine Moreau's private line." The room did not move. The air did not move. Vincent looked at Evelyn. He saw the moment she processed it, saw her eyes change, saw the specific quality of understanding move through her face, saw her understand not just the information, but everything the information meant about the past 3 years, about the Ricci dinner, about the calls, about the things his mother had known about the organization's internal workings that she should not have known unless someone with access had been talking to her, about whether Catherine Moreau's consistent strategic campaign to undermine Evelyn's place in this marriage had ever been simply a mother's preference, or whether it had been something more deliberate, more structural, more connected to the empire than anyone had let Evelyn see. He watched his wife's face understand all of it in the span of 4 seconds. "Vincent," Ray said, "you need to decide what you want to do about—" "Tell Ray to hold," Evelyn said. Her voice was quiet, and it was completely steady, and it was the voice of a woman who had just received the final piece of a puzzle she had been living inside for 3 years without knowing its shape, and who had decided in the 4 seconds it took to understand what she was looking at that she was not going to fall apart in this living room. Vincent looked at her. "Tell him to hold," she said again, "and stay on the line." He put the phone back to his ear. "Ray, hold where you are. Don't do anything else until I call you back." He paused. "Give me 20 minutes." He hung up. The living room was very still. Outside the windows, the sky had gone the color of old pewter, the last of the afternoon light dying over the lake, and the Chicago skyline was beginning its nightly conversion from structure to light, towers going amber and white against the dark, the city becoming its own constellation. Evelyn stood in the center of the room near her bags, and she was looking at the window, and he could see the side of her face and the specific quality of her jaw, and he did not speak because he understood, with the clarity of a man who was finally paying the kind of attention that cost something, that she needed the next minute to be hers. She turned. "Your mother," she said. She was feeding information to Gentry, or Gentry was feeding information to her. Which direction was it? "I don't know yet." "Does it matter which direction?" He thought about it honestly, because she deserved honesty and not a strategic answer. For understanding what she was doing, yes. For understanding what it means for us, no. He paused. Either way, she was connected to someone inside my organization who was also connected to a federal investigation. Either way, she knew things about my business that she should not have known unless someone with access was giving them to her. And either way, she used what she knew to... He stopped. "To keep me destabilized," Evelyn said. Not a question. Every time I got close to finding my footing here, every time I started to feel like I had a place that was real, the Ricci dinner, the comment about seating, that wasn't just cruelty, was it? That was deliberate. "I think so." "She wanted me gone." "Yes." "And you didn't see it?" "No." He said it without defense, without softening. "I didn't see it because she's my mother, and because I had been navigating her my entire life, and I had developed habits of not seeing what she did that were so old, I didn't recognize them as habits anymore. I recognized them as reality." He looked at her. "That is not an excuse. It is the most honest account I have." Evelyn was quiet. She looked at the bags at her feet. She looked at the window. She looked at him. "I need to know something," she said. "And I need you to not answer it quickly. I need you to actually think about it before you speak." "Okay." "Did you know? Not about Gentry, not about the federal angle, but about your mother. Did some part of you know what she was doing to me and decide it was easier not to address it?" The question sat in the room, and it had the particular irreducible weight of a question that could not be answered with aversion, only with the thing itself. He thought about it. He genuinely thought about it, standing there in the dying light with the city going dark behind the windows. And he went back through 3 years of dinners and phone calls and moments where he had registered something in his mother's behavior and filed it in the category of Catherine being Catherine, which was the category he had been filing things in since childhood, which was the category that had required the least from him. "Not consciously," he said. "But I think I knew something. I think I saw enough that if I had looked directly at it, I would have known. And I chose not to look directly at it because looking directly at it would have required a confrontation with her that I was not..." He stopped. "That I was not willing to have. Because she is my mother. And because the business and her social connections and her history with the family all made her someone I managed, rather than challenged." "Bald zou she zijn, mas sestaan." He paused. "Which means I chose my own comfort over your protection. Repeatedly. For 3 years. He held her gaze. "I know what that is." Evelyn looked at him for a long time without speaking. Then she went to the sofa and sat down, not with the controlled, upright posture of the woman who had been managing this day. She sat down the way a person sits when the adrenaline finally finishes its work and the body simply requires rest. She put her elbows on her knees and looked at the floor. "Come sit down," she said. He sat. Not beside her. He took the chair across from her, the one that put 4 feet of space between them, because 4 feet of space was honest, and sitting beside her right now would be a claim he hadn't earned. "I'm going to tell you what I want to do," she said. "And then I'm going to need you to tell me honestly whether you can actually do it. Not whether you want to, not whether you intend to, whether you actually can." "All right, I want to cancel the flight." She looked at him. I want to tell Margaret Hartwell that I'm taking the London position, but that my start date needs to move 90 days for personal reasons, and she'll accept that because she has wanted me for 2 years and 90 days is a reasonable ask. She paused. I want to spend those 90 days here, in this city, with you, doing the work, couples therapy, twice a week, with a therapist I choose, not someone from your network, someone I choose. Yes. I want full honesty about the federal situation as it develops. Every significant development, I hear it from you directly, not filtered, not managed. If it gets bad enough that you need to cooperate or negotiate or whatever the legal process requires, I'm part of that conversation. Yes. And I want... She stopped. The next part was harder. He could see it in the way her hands moved in her lap, a slight adjustment. The physical tell of a woman who was about to say something that was going to cost her something to say. I want to not be in Chicago. I said that before and I mean it more now, not less. What your mother did. What I now know she was doing all this time. I cannot be in a city where her presence is something I have to manage every time I leave this building. I can't. She looked at him. And I think you understand now, genuinely, why that's not negotiable. I understand. So after the 90 days, after the therapy starts, after the legal situation is clear, after you've made the formal transition to Ray, we go. You choose what to do about your mother on your own terms and your own timeline, but we go. Somewhere that belongs to us. He looked at her. You said Cape Town once, he said. In the third letter. You didn't say it directly, but there was a line about a coastline that isn't cold. He paused. Was that real? Something moved across her face. Surprise, then something softer. The expression of a person who has been seen in a specific and accurate way by someone they had given up expecting to see them. I looked it up once, she said, about a year ago. When I was still deciding. She stopped. I don't know if it was real. I just needed somewhere to put the idea, somewhere that felt like the opposite of this. Then that's where we go. She looked at him for a long moment. Vincent, she said, I'm serious about all of this. I know you are, and I need you to be serious about it not in a crisis way, not in a this is the problem I'm solving way. She looked at her hands. I need you to be serious about it on a Thursday morning when nothing is wrong, when it's boring, when there's no fire to put out and no deal to close and it's just us in a room and the only thing that needs to happen is that you look at me and you're actually there. Her voice was steady, but there was something in it now, something that had been held back all day and was very close to the surface. That's the thing I need most. That's the thing I don't know if you can give me. The ordinary days. He thought about what he had said to Marco. I don't know yet if it's permanent. He thought about what he had said to Ray. Set up the Gentry situation. He thought about the morning, the phone calls, the photograph, the attorney, the cold back room of Marco's butcher shop. He thought about how completely, instinctively, mechanically, good he was at all of it, how it required almost no effort, how he could run 3 crises simultaneously and never once lose his heartbeat. He thought about standing at the kitchen counter with a tin of Earl Grey tea in his hands, not knowing how to open it. I don't know if I can give you that, he said. I'm being honest. I have no evidence that I'm capable of it because I've never actually tried. Everything I know about myself comes from rooms like the one I was in today. I don't know who I am in a quiet room. He paused. But I know that I want to find out. And I know that I want to find out with you. And I know... He stopped, and what came through his voice was not managed and not performed and not constructed, just the plain, insufficient, essential truth of it. I know that sitting on that kitchen floor this morning reading what you wrote when you thought no one was listening was the most important thing I've learned about myself in 41 years. Not about you, about myself, about what kind of man I chose to be for 3 years, and whether that's the only kind of man I'm able to be. He stopped again. I don't think it is. I think there's another version of me. I've never tried to live in it, but I think it exists. Evelyn looked at him. Her eyes were wet. Not overflowing. She had the specific, controlled expression of someone who is feeling something fully and is choosing to feel it rather than contain it, which was different from crying. She let him see it. That was its own thing. Okay, she said quietly. He waited. Okay, she said again. I'm canceling the flight. Otoka. She called Margaret Hartwell at 4:15 and spoke for 7 minutes. And when she came back into the living room, she set her phone on the table and looked at the 2 bags standing in the center of the room, and then she picked them up and carried them back down the hallway to the master bedroom. He heard her put them in the closet. He heard the closet door close. He called Ray. I need you to listen carefully, he said. I'm making the transfer permanent. Full authority, full operational control, effective end of this week. Get the paperwork drafted. I want it done right. Clean, legal on the surface, structured so the exposure from the federal situation lands on the organizational structure and not on you personally. He paused. And Ray, the mother situation, Catherine's connection to Gentry. I need to know the full scope of it before I speak to her again. Everything. How long, how much, what she knew. He paused again. But quietly, I'm not starting a war with my own family. I just need to understand what I'm working with. Understood, Ray said. Vincent. Yeah, a beat. You doing the right thing. It was the most personal thing Ray Castellano had ever said to him in 11 years of professional intimacy, and it landed with the specific weight of a thing said by a man who believed it. I'm trying to, Vincent said. He hung up. The therapist Evelyn chose was named Dr. Sandra Okafor. She had an office in Lincoln Square, and she did not know who Vincent Moreau was, or if she did, she gave no indication of it at the first session 2 weeks later, which was the session Vincent arrived at 9 minutes early for and sat in the waiting room reading a 6-month-old magazine and working very hard at appearing like a man who sat in therapy waiting rooms regularly. Evelyn arrived exactly on time and sat down beside him and said nothing, but she put her hand on the arm of his chair, not on his hand, just on the arm, briefly, before she took it back. It was a small thing. He noticed it completely. The first session was 45 minutes of Sandra Okafor asking them both to describe the marriage in one word. Evelyn said, invisible. Vincent said, after a long pause, efficient. Sandra Okafor wrote both words down and did not comment on them and moved on. And Vincent sat with both words in his chest for the rest of the day and understood, without being told, exactly what the gap between them had cost. They went back the following week, yet. The federal situation resolved in the 63rd day. Vincent's attorney negotiated a proffer that drew a clear line between Vincent's personal exposure and the organizational conduct that Gentry had documented, and the specific nature of the line, where it fell, what it covered, what it required Vincent to surrender in terms of operational documentation, cost him significantly in terms of things that could not be recovered. There were 3 weeks in that period where he did not sleep well, and where the uncertainty of it was a physical weight he carried in his shoulders and his jaw, and the specific tightness behind his eyes that Evelyn, who was watching him now with the full attention she had reclaimed for herself, could read in the way he held his coffee cup in the morning. She did not pretend she couldn't see it. Tell me how bad today was, she said one night, the 49th day, sitting across from him at the kitchen table at 10:15 with the lights low. Manageable, he said. She looked at him. Bad, he said. It was bad. The documentation they want covers the Westfield arrangement, and if they pursue the secondary parties, it reaches people who trusted me. He put his hands flat on the table. I can't protect them from this, and He stopped. I'm not used to not being able to protect them. Is there anything you can do? My attorney is working an angle. It may hold. He looked at her. I don't know. Okay. She didn't tell him it would be fine. She didn't offer comfort that was larger than the situation warranted. She poured him more coffee and she stayed at the table and she said, What do you need tonight? He thought about it. He thought about it as a real question that deserved a real answer, which was the thing Sandra Okafor had been working on with him for 6 weeks. The gap between what he projected and what he actually needed, the 30-year practice of flattening the second thing so the first thing could function. I need to not be alone in this room, he said. Then I'll stay up, she said. She did. Catherine Moreau came to the penthouse one final time, 44 days after the kitchen confrontation. She did not call first. She came up because the doorman, who was new and did not have the full briefing, let her through without checking. Vincent was not home. He was at his attorney's office. Evelyn was in the kitchen with her laptop open and the Hartwell preliminary work spread across the island, and she heard the elevator and then the front door, and she stood up. Catherine came into the kitchen doorway and stopped. She looked at Evelyn the way she always had, with the measured, assessing gaze of a woman who had spent a lifetime being the most important person in every room she entered, and who found any threat to that position personally offensive. She was 68 years old, and she was immaculately dressed, and she was, Evelyn had always understood, genuinely intelligent in a way that made her dangerous. "He's not here," Evelyn said. "I know. I came to see you." Evelyn did not close her laptop. She looked at Catherine across the kitchen island, and she waited, because she had learned in 3 years of being in rooms with this woman that waiting was the only posture that Catherine could not perform around. She needed response to work. Silence disrupted her. Catherine looked at the kitchen, at the organized work on the island, at the ceramic pitcher on the second shelf, at the 2 mugs on the counter, evidence of 2 people sharing a morning. "I understand you're staying," she said. "Yes." "I understand you're leaving Chicago." "Yes." Catherine was quiet for a moment. She looked at her own hands, which were clasped in front of her, and something moved through her face that was not quite anything Evelyn had words for. Not remorse, not exactly, but the complicated private expression of a woman who had built a structure over decades and was standing in the moment where she understood the structure had a cost she had not fully calculated. "The thing with Paul Gentry," she said, quietly. Evelyn said nothing. "I want you to understand what I was doing." Catherine looked up. "I was protecting my son, the way I have always protected him, the way his father required protecting and his grandfather before. I knew Gentry because Gentry came to me. He wanted leverage, and I gave him access because the access I gave him was to things that would not touch Vincent directly. That was the arrangement." She paused. "I was trying to protect Vincent from you. From me. From the distraction of you. From what you were doing to his focus. What you were costing him." She said it without cruelty. That was almost the most difficult thing about it. She said it with the complete sincerity of a woman who had believed it entirely. "Women like you, accomplished, independent with their own ambitions, they divide a man. His father taught me that. A man in Vincent's position cannot be divided." Evelyn looked at her for a long time. "I am going to say this once," Evelyn said, "clearly, and then I'm going to ask you to leave." She closed her laptop. "You did not protect your son. You taught him for 40 years that the people in his life were variables to be managed, and that love was a transaction, and that a wife was a function. And then you spent 3 years reinforcing every single one of those lessons through me. And the result was a marriage that nearly ended, and a man who didn't know his wife's birthday." She paused. "That is not protection. That is damage. And you did it to him long before you ever met me." Catherine's face had gone still. "He's working on undoing it," Evelyn said, "which means he's working against 40 years of what you built in him. That is extraordinarily difficult, and he is doing it. And you can be part of his life going forward if you're willing to do the same work on yourself, but not like this, not the way you've been doing it." She picked up her laptop and held it. "I'm asking you to leave now." Catherine stood in the doorway for a moment. She looked at Evelyn with an expression that was stripped of its usual architecture. No condescension, no precision, just the bare, complicated face of an old woman who had made choices over a lifetime and was standing in the long shadow they cast. "He chose you," she said. It was not an accusation. It was something closer to acknowledgement. "Yes," Evelyn said. "He did." Catherine left. Imam. The legal situation resolved on the 63rd day with terms Vincent's attorney described as the best achievable given the scope of Gentry's documentation. There were financial penalties. There was a cooperation requirement that cost Vincent access to certain organizational records that Ray had already sanitized as thoroughly as possible. There was a period of supervised financial disclosure that would last 18 months. It was not clean. Nothing about it was clean. But it drew a line, and the line held, and on the other side of it was a version of Vincent Moreau's life that was not defined by what he had built for the past 20 years. He came home that evening and sat at the kitchen table and told Evelyn all of it. Every term, every cost, every name in the documentation that he had not been able to protect. He did not spare himself the parts that were hard to say, and he did not ask her to respond to any of it, just to hear it, because being heard was a thing he was learning to need. She heard all of it. When he finished, she said, "What do you want to do tomorrow?" He looked at her. Not the legal thing, not the transition, just tomorrow. She looked at him across the table. "What do you want to do?" He thought about it. He thought about it the way she had asked him to think about things, as a real question, not a managed answer. "I want to wake up and not have anywhere I need to be," he said. "I want to sit in this kitchen and drink coffee and talk about Cape Town. I want to look at apartments online. I want to do something that is only about what comes next and not about what came before." She smiled. It was the first full smile he had seen on her face in longer than he could accurately calculate. It was not the performed smile of a woman at a function. It was small and genuine, and it reached her eyes, and it was the most valuable thing in the room. "I know a good rental agency in Clifton," she said. "I looked it up a year ago." "Of course you did. There's an apartment with a view of the Atlantic that's been available for 3 months, which probably means the kitchen is bad." "I can live with a bad kitchen. You've never cooked a meal in your life." "I made breakfast once. It was acceptable." She laughed. It was short and real, and it filled the kitchen for a second and then dissolved, and they sat across from each other at the table with the city going dark outside the windows and the lake light dying on the water, and the silence that settled between them was not the silence of a marriage in crisis. It was the particular, specific silence of two people who have been through a thing and are sitting quietly on the other side of it. They left Chicago 71 days after the morning Evelyn packed 2 suitcases. There was no ceremony to the leaving. They did not have a party. Ray came to the building the morning of and helped carry 3 boxes to the car that was going to storage, and he shook Vincent's hand at the lobby door, and the handshake lasted a second longer than a handshake between 2 men who were only professionally connected, and then Ray walked back into the building and Vincent got in the car. Evelyn was already inside. She had said her goodbyes the previous evening to a handful of women she had maintained careful, warm friendships with across the 3 years of this marriage. The ones who had kept showing up for her even when she had been gradually submerged. She had not said goodbye to Catherine, and Catherine had not reached out. The car went to O'Hare. The flight was 14 hours with a connection in London, which was its own kind of appropriate. They spent 4 hours in Heathrow, and Evelyn walked him through the terminal and showed him the gate, where she would have arrived months earlier, carrying 2 suitcases and 3 years of careful grief, starting a different kind of life. He looked at the gate. He didn't say anything. She didn't need him to. They landed in Cape Town in the early morning. The air coming off the Atlantic was cold and sharp and entirely unlike Chicago. It had the alive, mineral quality of a coast that was not apologizing for itself. Table Mountain was visible from the airport road, enormous and flat-topped against a sky that was going from deep blue to the first suggestion of gold, and Evelyn watched it from the car window with the particular expression of someone who has been imagining a place for a long time and is now inside the reality of it, measuring the two against each other. "Well," she said. "Yeah," he said. They had rented the apartment in Clifton for 6 months, the one with the Atlantic view and the bad kitchen, which turned out to be bad only in the sense that it was small, not in any functional sense. It was on the 3rd floor of a building that had been painted white and was slowly going the color of sea salt, and from the main window you could see the water from first light until it went dark. It was nothing like the Vandermeer penthouse. It had the scale of a life that was actually lived in rather than performed. He stood at the window the first morning and looked at the water for a long time. Evelyn came up behind him and stood beside him. She had Earl Grey in both hands, her mug and one for him, and she handed it to him without comment, and they stood at the window together and looked at the Atlantic doing its enormous, indifferent thing on the other side of the glass. "It's a bad kitchen," she said. "It's a great kitchen. You haven't cooked anything in it yet. It has potential." She was quiet for a moment. The water was green and silver in the early light. "Sandra gave us a referral," she said. "A therapist here. She trained in New York. Sandra says she's excellent. You already set it up." "I looked into it. I haven't set it up." She glanced at him. "Did you want to?" "Yes," he said. No pause, no calculation, just yes. She nodded. She looked back at the water. "What do you want to do today?" she asked. Same question she had asked at the kitchen table in Chicago, the night the legal situation resolved. The question that was its own ongoing practice, asking and meaning it, and waiting for an honest answer. He thought about it. "I want to walk down to the water," he said, "and I want to not know what comes after that." She looked at him. "Okay," she said. Well, a year later, on a quiet beach 20 minutes from the Clifton apartment, on a morning when the sky was clear and the Atlantic was flat, and the only people present were a handful of close friends who had made the trip from various places across 2 continents, Vincent Moreau and Evelyn Harper renewed the vows they had made to each other in a different life. There was no photographer. There was no orchestrated ceremony. Evelyn had written what she wanted to say on a piece of paper that she held in both hands, and she read it in a voice that didn't shake, and what she said was not about what they had survived, but about what she believed in the ordinary days, in the consistent choosing, in the man who had sat on his kitchen floor at 4 in the morning and let himself be broken open by what he read. She said she had not canceled the flight because the pain was gone. She had canceled it because she had decided that the man standing in front of her was worth the work of finding out if he could become who she believed he could be. He had not written anything down. He had thought about it and decided that if he wrote it down, he would manage it, and managing it was the wrong thing. He stood in front of her on the sand with the Atlantic at his back and the small circle of people who mattered standing around them, and he said, "I learned your birthday. I know what you drink in the morning. I know your favorite books, all 3 of them, and why you like the 3rd one best even though you always say the 2nd one. I know that you think better when you walk, and that you need 20 minutes alone after social things, and that you hate the sound of a TV in another room." He stopped. His voice was not entirely steady, and he did not try to make it entirely steady. "I know that you wrote me 3 letters and didn't send them because you kept deciding to try one more time. And I know that the bravest thing you ever did was not staying. It was leaving, because leaving was the thing that made any of this possible." He paused. "I'm sorry it took that. I'm sorry I needed that much." He looked at her. "I won't need that much again." Evelyn looked at him the way she had looked at him in the kitchen in Chicago. The morning she handed him the mug of tea, with both eyes fully present, the protective distance gone. She was not performing anything. She was just there. She took his hand. The water moved behind them, patient and enormous. The sky was clear from one edge to the other. And on a quiet beach in Cape Town, without ceremony and without noise, with nothing resolved except everything that mattered, the 2 of them turned back toward the rest of their lives and walked.